you as well. My name is Lauren Hansen. I'm the Executive Director of Stand Strong Coalition. We are a community-based coalition, really passionate about healthy families, and we work to equip parents to help their students not use drugs and alcohol so that they have healthy futures. And we are super excited to host tonight's event with Catalyst Club. And so Hanvita is going to share just a little bit about Catalyst.
Hi everyone, I'm Hanvita and I'm a committee member of Stevenson Catalyst's Parent Outreach Committee. I'm super excited to be sharing tonight to advocate for teen substance prevention. Catalyst is a youth substance prevention organization devoted and determined to create and promote a substance-free lifestyle within the community. Through concentrated evidence-based work, students are able to make an impact on the lives of others by changing the culture and perception of substances. Catalyst has over 200 members composed of several communities at both the junior high and high schools in our community. By leading through example in everyday life and choosing to make decisions that hold each other and each member accountable, Catalyst aims to influence the lives of all those we come in contact with. This year, we are beginning a new multi-year campaign called What's Your Why? It is an opportunity for Catalyst members, staff, and parents to openly share their why for their own non-use choice or the reason they think teens should remain substance-free. Parents play a tremendous role in the shaping of their teens' behavioral choices, and so it is vitally important that parents educate their children about why exactly they feel that a substance-free lifestyle is the healthiest choice their students can make. Parents' actions, choices, and behaviors have a direct influence on their students' choices and behavior. One way parents can help support this campaign is by subscribing to our monthly pamphlet that is electronically sent out called Catalyst Up. In this monthly pamphlet, there are facts, tips, and statistics regarding teen substance use, prevention, and the benefits of living a substance-free lifestyle. Please take out your devices at this moment and scan the QR code to get access to Catalyst Up. So I'm going to give you guys a moment to do that. You can just open your camera.
Maybe with the next iPhone, this one, no.
Oh yeah, we can email it too, so yeah. So once again, we thank you greatly for taking this significant step in wanting to make a beneficial impact on your child's life and are so grateful to Stand Strong for their partnership on this event. I choose to be substance-free because I want to be in control of my actions at all times in order to further live a physically and mentally healthy life. That being said, what is your why? Thank you.
Thank you, Hanvita. So you may have noticed that there's some extra equipment on the stage with us tonight. We have a mock teen bedroom that you're welcome to walk through at the end of the evening. Our partners at Link Together helped put this together for us, and it's your average teen bedroom, as you can see, a little bit messy potentially, and you can walk through and just see, understand different drug paraphernalia and references and things that you might not notice, but that can be hidden within your teen's bedrooms. So feel free to take a walk through that following the panel tonight. And before we get started, we wanted to have a little fun with you all. This includes our online folks as well. So as Hanvita mentioned, there's the What's Your Why campaign that Catalyst is launching this year. And at Wellness Fest, we asked students, what is your why? And we asked them what their number one reason why they don't use drugs and alcohol, why they decide to stay substance-free. And there was one answer that rose to the top. And so in just a moment, if you're in the room, I will invite you to the first person to raise their hand and guess the correct answer will get an Amazon gift card. So there's something in this for you. And then those online, if you type it in the chat, whoever gets first will get you an Amazon gift card as well. So I will have a countdown And Vita, please look for the quickest hands. Are you ready? Okay. All right. 3, 2, 1. Who wants to guess? Yes.
My parents.
Parents. That is actually a really important one. Not one of the ones that they listed at the top. Yeah.
My peers?
Peers. That's another great one, but not the number one for this group. Yeah. Oh.
Health.
Health. Well done. Yes. Health. Correct. And you can bring your prize. And to those monitoring the chat, we'll make sure to get it to you too. All right. Now it is my pleasure to have our panelists introduce themselves. We have a great blend of experts, really local experts, from staff to pediatricians to police officers and more, and so students. And so I will have you, Cristina, Dr. Cortesi, introduce yourself first.
I'm Dr. Cristina Cortesi. I'm the Substance Prevention Coordinator here at Stevenson High School. I am a licensed clinical social worker and a certified alcohol and drug counselor. And it's my job really just to be here as a resource for both students and families in regards to either the students' use or issues that the family is having around youth. And I handle all the intervention and prevention related to this topic. And I'm fortunate to be a co-sponsor of Catalyst as well.
I'm
Dr. Susan Sirota. I am a Stevenson parent. I am also a pediatrician in the community for about 27 years. I am a founding member of Stand Strong Coalition, so have had a long time interest in youth substance prevention. And I also co-chair, or actually I think chair now, our marijuana committee. And our committee is always looking for parent volunteers to join us. So if any of you have interest, please do reach out to me. Thank you.
Principal Gobble.
Hi everybody, my name is Troy Gobble, and this is my 10th year as the principal of Stevenson High School. It's absolutely fantastic, love every minute of it. I am also blessed to be a parent of a Stevenson student and a couple of students in junior high, and so this work is critical and just so important to me for almost every reason you can imagine. So, great to see you.
Over here, can they hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Maya. I'm a senior at Stevenson. That means I'm a teenager. So I'm the youngest person on this panel, just narrowly beating out Dr. Cortesi by a couple years. My brain is
I'm like 2.5 years.
Oh, you know what?
If that's what we're doing, that's
Everyone quickly calculate your age by teenage years. I'm currently the president of Catalyst, and I'm super excited to be here.
Hi everybody, my name is Officer Mike Lill. I work for the Lincoln Shire Police Department. I'm assigned full-time here at Stevenson. I've been in the police about 25 years. This is actually my 8th year of being a school resource officer throughout my career. I look forward to tonight working with Catalyst and Stand Strong and giving the perspective to you guys as parents from the police.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. So we did receive questions as parents registered for the night, so we'll start going through those, but our students will be passing out, if you didn't receive note cards with pens, so throughout the evening, as you think of questions, please feel free to write them and we'll get them up here and try to answer as many as we can. And then also to those joining us online, please feel free to write them in the chat. But we will start off with you, Principal Gobble. So we're about 1 month into the new school year. Could you share from your perspective, how are students doing socially and emotionally? What are you seeing across campus?
It's such an amazing time. It has been very challenging to think through all the ways to get school running up and acting as we hope it is, safe for everyone. But while that's been so challenging, this last month has been one of my favorite months of my entire career because I have never felt such energy in the building. And every opportunity that we've offered for kids to come to campus and be a part of something has been the largest attendance that we've ever had. We had more than 150 more students come to the freshman mixer, little dance we hold in the first week of school. The first football game, the stands were overflowing. Every club and activity at this point is above its roles for the last year. The sports are exploded. And what I see in that is just the need to belong and the need to be together. And so, in some ways, kids, when I see them, they're happy. You see them at lunch, they're just so thrilled to be together and having those chats. And even the conversations in class are some of the best that we've had in a long time. Kids, they really want it. All that being said, the last year and a half has taken quite a toll on some students. And, there are students, the introverted students who maybe even really liked being home on Zoom, and it was a safe place for them. And there are some kids who coming back to this building is very challenging. So I do think it's been wonderful. I think it's pointed out and maybe even magnified some concerns that we've had with students and really made us think about them in a different way. But I'm really pleased at what it is for everybody to be back. So that just means that the rest of us have to watch out for the kids that need that extra help, and especially you parents at home, make sure you're watching for those things and taking care of your students who might be just not quite ready to be in a social space.
Thank you, Principal Gobble. The next is to Maya, our amazing student. What strategies have you and your peers used to transition well back into in-person learning and into a new school year?
Okay, I don't know how technology works, so I hope you can hear me. I think strategy-wise, I think balance and structure is always a really important thing. So I'm like a visual human, so like I own a whiteboard and I like write down my schedule on my whiteboard because otherwise I forget things and I like oversleep and don't go to clubs, and it's not a good time. So I always think representing your life visually is helpful, is for me. And also, who doesn't like crossing things off, like physically? It just feels good, like something about it is great. I couldn't tell you what it was, but if you have an answer, please let me know. I also think, not necessarily a specific tangential strategy, I think a mindset that's really important is having perspective related to really the severity of things that are happening, because I think sometimes at Stevenson, kids get stuck on one small thing in their day, and it can overwhelm them really easily. So I think remembering that like not everything is the end of the world, which kind of being a teenager, everything feels like that. Like everything feels like the end of the world. I stubbed my toe the other day. I kid you not, I almost burst into tears. I was like so upset about it. But I think that just remembering that like you don't have to be perfect all the time, and also as caregivers, I think it's really important to tell Stevenson students that mindset is okay, and also as adults in their life, just remember that like taking life one step at a time is not always a bad thing. Like if you get a 2 in algebra, I promise you still have a shot at getting into college. Like it's not going to be the end of the world. I think that's really important.
Thanks, Maya. The next question is to Dr. Sirota. One of the parents writes, during COVID, my kids lost interest in almost everything except video games. How can I help them get back on track with school and encourage them to find their passion, especially as teenagers? As parents, we feel somewhat hopeless. How can we help them to be self-motivated?
Yeah, I think this is something that I probably hear almost every day at work. This is an incredibly common scenario. And so I like to start off by letting people know that they're not alone. They're not alone as a family experiencing this, and their teen is not alone. That many people are finding themselves in the same place. Obviously, the answer to this question goes far beyond, oh, just limit screen time and everything will be okay. Because as our kids are returning to school, and Principal Gobble just mentioned this already, we really need to give them time. I think for all teens, they just need some time to kind of adjust. This has been a very significant change for them, and it's many months to be away from what was always a standard school routine for them. So I think as parents, if we can come from a place of patience, if we can come from a place of being supported in a way that our teens experience the support, and then just be really thoughtful intentional about how we frame our concern for them. Because there's a tendency, and I think even in my house, we've heard this, where it's like, you gotta do something, you gotta get involved, you're not motivated, you're not gonna do well, you're not gonna find success. What are you gonna put on your college application if you don't do anything in school? And that's not gonna work right now. And so if we just acknowledge for teens that this is a really hard time, and it's still a hard time. Many of us are experiencing that sense of going backwards a little bit, even with the start of school. And that we want them to find their motivation, we can help them. It doesn't need to be a passion. Finding some enjoyment one day in one thing is a great way to start. And so really letting kids know, like, it's okay to take small steps, motivation will come. I do think, though, it's also important to determine, like, take this approach, but determine whether there might be a bigger or a greater mental health concern going on. Because that is the case for some teens. And it's not really that they're just unmotivated. There really may be a bigger adjustment disorder going on with some significant social anxiety or some significant depression. As parents, we can help our kids explore. We want them to find ways to get involved in school on their own, but not a bad idea to go on the school website, sort of check out when clubs meet, knowing your own kid's schedule, like maybe the morning that a particular club meets is a good morning for you to bring them to school. So try to start to guide them in a direction, even if it's a decision themselves. And besides exploring opportunities at school, I think it's great to help teens explore opportunities that might feel perhaps more comfortable for them in the community. I'm seeing more teens get jobs now and work than I have ever seen in my 27 years in practice ever. And many of them are really enjoying that and finding some motivation in the workplace. And then finally, we have great student services teams here, which I've learned as a parent of 3 Stevenson students. And so I think if you're not getting your teen or helping them to the place you think you might want them to be, or even they might want to be, more importantly, if you can guide them to meet with their counselor, someone on their student services team, this might help give them sort of this safe connection to a supportive adult within the school community, who might then have some suggestions to help them get on track, find something that interests them, and find that path into connecting to the community here at school. One thing I've always heard my 3 kids say is they really like being students at Stevenson because they think that it's a nice place, kids are nice, and generally a welcoming community. So just helping your student find that experience. And I'm going to stop with that.
Love your well thought out answer, Dr. Sirota. We got some requests from our online folks. They're having a little bit difficulty hearing, so if we could raise potentially the sound or our voices, that would be great. For you, Dr. Cortesi, one parent says their student is abusing some of their medicines at home, but more so experiencing more depression since the COVID pandemic began. How can this parent best support their child?
So I would start by saying that I think it's a common misconception that students at Stevenson might use some prescription medication more regularly for academic performance enhancement. I often get families saying, I hear from people that students use ADHD medications to do better on tests. And we have surveyed that data, and that is not ringing true with our students. So when we gather the data on that topic, specifically, we don't see that happening more here than in other places, and it wouldn't even be one of the most commonly used substances at Stevenson. So I wanted to start by just sharing that because I don't think it's a norm. With that said, if someone's experiencing depression, I can see why they may think that utilizing some other medication could be a safe route or an avenue they might explore. However, as adults, we of course want to discourage that behavior. I think if you find that your child is experiencing depression, I think starting by being patient would be the most important thing. I think people who are not experiencing depression often look at depression and get frustrated with it. And you have to realize that if you're feeling frustrated about it, the person who's experiencing it is that much more frustrated. So really taking the opportunity to listen to what it is that they have to say. Even if you feel like they're sharing something that comes across exaggerated, it's their reality. So it's really important to validate as much as what they're feeling as you possibly can. And explore a dialogue with them. So more so than anything, you just want to have them talking and sharing their feelings and their perspectives with you, regardless of what you think of what it is that they're sharing. Having that ongoing dialogue will help you keep a pulse on where things are at. If you really do feel like depression is something that your child is struggling with, I would encourage you to consult your pediatrician first. But we here as a school, again, as Dr. Sirota mentioned, we want to be here to partner with you and support you. As students are coming back, a wide range, as Mr. Gobble said, of emotions are occurring. And we are here to help you through that. So from the psychologists, social workers, counselors, your entire SST team, we're here to support you in that. There really is no consequence to you coming forward. Anything that you share is confidential. It doesn't go in a permanent record somewhere. We don't write it down. It doesn't follow your student. Our goal is really to support you in getting the resources that you need, helping educate you, and getting your student the supports that they need to be successful.
Thank you. Officer Lill, the next question is to you. We know from research that sometimes a decline in mental health is connected to an increase in substance use. But while the vast majority of Stevenson students do not use drugs or alcohol, among those who have used, have you seen any trends lately? Also, if you could talk right into the microphone, that would be great.
All right. As school resource officers, my partner, Officer Lill, and I work very closely with the SSTs, as Dr. Cortesi said, the social workers, the counselors, the deans, and we do get a feel for the mental health of students, and I can tell you that those groups of people have been working very, very hard to help students navigate the emotional ups and downs of the pandemic and the wide range of emotions that they've been going through. And just today I read an email that said that a health and wellness study of 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic probably, showed that of the respondents to the survey, 10% of them had seriously considered suicide. And that's a pretty alarming number, I think, to anybody. And so with that, I would say that, yeah, our teams are in crisis, and most likely, without a doubt, the pandemic's not helping, but the staff here is certainly working very hard to make sure that that's being managed, and if they're made aware of it. So it's really important for parents to know to pay attention to that mental health aspect. With that, as the police, we've always been concerned about mental health. This has been a huge hot button issue for us because we know it's linked to drug addiction, drug abuse, and often associated dangerous behaviors of people under the influence. So, from our perspective, I do anticipate, and I'm concerned that we're going to see a rise here at school. But the reality is, at this point, we're just getting back, right? And we really don't have a full view of what's going to happen throughout the school year. We've certainly seen the typical things that we saw pre-pandemic, which were nicotine use in school and cannabis use in school through mostly electronic means now. There's not a lot of lighters and pipes or joints or things like that. So the technology certainly played a role in how students use drugs. But it's not really clear. The picture isn't clear at this point. I also feel like, and we discussed this in our Stand Strong group, that the use among students throughout the pandemic, it feels like it has a little bit more clandestine or hidden feel to it. And so the picture is really not clear to us as the police. And that's what places even more importance on what Dr. Cortesi is doing with her surveys of students and getting that viewpoint from that perspective.
Thanks, Officer Lill. Back to you, Maya. What tools and tips would you give parents to help them help their students choose not to use drugs and alcohol?
Okay, well, I have never been parented. I don't know, or sorry, I have never parented anyone. Sorry.
You almost got big trouble.
Yeah, she's sitting right there. I have never parented anyone, but coming from the perspective of what I would want in an approach, I think that starting with a conversation is a really important thing. And while the first response I get to that, answering the question like that is, that doesn't work, because the first thing that happens when I tell my kid to do something, or not to do something more specifically, is they immediately go do it. So if you were to look a teenager in the face and say, don't touch that, the next thing they're going to do is reach for it. But I promise it works. We have data that backs up this approach. Kids that know their parents' expectations are actually less likely to use substances. Now let that sink in for a minute. Because I know it kind of goes against everything that you assume about teenagers, but I promise, like, it's working, and it's sinking in slowly. You just have to say it a couple of times. And so I think when you start that conversation off, it's really important to start with a question. Those are bonus points. Because when you ask a teenager about their perspective about something, one, you're more likely, to get an honest answer. And then you also have a little bit of an advantage there because you get the perspective of where they are in their mindset. You know, with the foresight of an adult, where you want them to be. And then you get to ask yourself, how do you want them to get there? And so what a teenager needs is not scare tactics. It's really easy to pull up a statistic of how many DUIs happen every year, which is a really scary statistic. But it's really easy for a teenager to be able to look at that and say, I'll never let it get to that point, right? It's really easy for teenagers to do that. So it's not going to work. What you need to do is relate it to how their choice to potentially use substances relates to their life right now. So, me, for example, I'm an FMP. I can't be an FMP. For those of you who don't know what an FMP is, sorry, I just realized. We have people who don't know what FMPs are. They're freshman mentors, so they're upperclassmen that mentor freshmen every year throughout the school year. And it's a really fun thing that I get to do in school, but it's a privilege, right? Just like most things at school, attending homecoming, having a license, that's a really big one. Getting admitted into college, that's a really big one at Stevenson. If you connect the choice to use substances with negative impacts on teens' goals in the future, that's a really good way to approach that.
Thanks, Mom. Those are great strategies. Principal Gobble. One parent asked, or said, there's a lot of self-imposed stress related to academic performance and acceptance to a good college, like Maya mentioned. Could you provide parents some suggestions and methods to use to help teenagers have a more balanced, realistic, and less stressed perspective?
All right, so this will be a 2-hour answer. Hope you're ready. Let me just say a couple things. First, to sort of set the stage. Number one, the mission of this school is success for every student. And we've chosen that phrase specifically because it doesn't say every student will get into blank college, or every student will be successful at calculus, or every student will be a good, musician. It's success for every student, for every student. Every student should be able to find the success that is theirs. So when people are doing Stevenson right, they're making the choices that they're passionate about. There's, 150 clubs, 30 sports, over 206 different academic courses you can take. There's no one path through this school. And you might hear from the person across the fence like, oh gosh, you have to take this class when you're a sophomore, and oh, these 3 classes when you're a junior, and it's just not true. And you should pick the classes that make the most sense for what you want to do. So that's one point. Another thing I'd like to mention, because the question is really like, what can we do, right? So I would like to recommend a book that was written 20 years ago, 15 years ago by Dr. Carol Dweck. It's called Mindset. I buy that book for every person that I hire here at Stevenson. We give them a copy. I'm gonna give you, I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. First of all, when you buy the book, only read chapter 1 and 2. If you want to read farther, that's fine, but all the good stuff is in the first 2 chapters. I honestly believe you can download it from Google as well. But the point of the book is people come at situations in their life, they can either have a fixed mindset where they say, well, my abilities are fixed. I can only do this so well. Or they can have a growth mindset. And a growth mindset means that I might not be great at that, but I can continue to get better every week. So what this sounds like when you talk to your kids is instead of saying, and this might sound silly, but it's sort of a silly example, but instead of saying, wow, you got an A in your test, you're so smart at that. That is promoting that your ability is the reason why you were able to do well on that test. But the better answer, the better way to promote that growth mindset is to say, you must have worked really hard to get that grade. You must have put in a lot of effort. Talk to me about how you studied for that so that we can think about that the next time you have a test. Or I know that you did great on this English assignment. How can we use the way that you studied for English to help you do better in math, where you seem to struggle? So the conversation becomes more about the process of learning and less about the idea that you have some innate natural ability that's getting you to a place. Because quite honestly, when you're 16, 17, or 18 years old, you have some innate natural ability. I hope that at my age I have more than I did then, and you will continue to grow. That is a really powerful way to change the way that we speak to our kids to help support them. And if you have a bad day, the problem is if you do poorly on a test and you're coming at the world with a fixed mindset, then as soon as you do bad on that test, it's, I'm not good enough to do that well. And those are the kind of things that can change your academic trajectory. So that language with your family is really important. I use it all the time with my kids, which they now hate because they caught on. But I think that's an important piece. Just a silly, maybe a silly story. All three of the kids in the Gobble household run cross country at different levels. We like to say that the Gobble family has the runs. But cross country is a really interesting sport because, like, right now on the Stevenson cross country team, there's about 70 girls who go out there every day and run. And when you go to a race, one kid's gonna win, right? But all those kids go out and work hard every day. All those kids go out and practice hard every day. And some of the biggest celebrations at the end of the run are for a kid who's in 48th place, who instead of finishing 48th today, finishes 45th. And that growth that they made from the last race to this race is a celebration. So when you think about the world in that way, that's how we want our kids to think about their academic success as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Love that. Dr. Sirota, next question is to you. As a parent, I've seen so many teens vaping in the community. Is it water vapor and is it safe?
Short answer, yes, there's a lot of vaping. No, it's not water vapor, and no, it's not safe. But let me give you some more information because I think it's really important to understand what's going on with vaping. So what's exhaled when someone is vaping is actually not a vapor at all. It's a misnomer, and it creates this perception of something that's relatively harmless. It's actually an aerosol. And an aerosol is really particles that are suspended in gas.
Hairspray.
I always use, you're so online. I always talk about hairspray because, and I'm going to tell you in just a bit what's in this aerosol when we talk about vaping nicotine. But vaping can also be marijuana. It's also very common. I think Officer Lill mentioned that a little earlier. So because it's suspended in gas, what is in that aerosol can become toxic to those of us, not just the individual who's inhaling it into their lungs, but those of us around. So I always say, think about hairspray in a bathroom, and someone's done using hairspray, and then you have that residual, what's on the vanity countertop. So you have things in the environment, we can get our hands on that, it can be absorbed through our skin, or especially through the skin of children, which is a little higher absorption. We can breathe it in, it's in the air around us. Why does this matter, and why did I say yes to the first part of the question? Because e-cigarettes are now the most commonly used tobacco product. And so what that means in numbers is in 2020, which, as we went into the pandemic, one of our national studies that gives us this information was sort of ended abruptly in March of 2020, but at that time, 3.6 million teens were using e-cigarettes, and if you look at high schoolers, that accounts for about 20% of high schoolers across the country. So it's a lot of kids who are using. And in fact, disappointingly, last week, the FDA had an opportunity to bring this under control. A year ago, the FDA said, we are going to review in 1 year the products that are on the market, in particular Juul, but some of the other popular e-cigarette products, and we are going to make a determination, and we're going to review, are these products in the best interest of public health? I mean, those of us here think we know the answer to that, but what did the FDA do? They said, we need more time to review. So they essentially gave these manufacturers a pass for an indefinite period of time, which means we expect to see more vaping among teens. We don't think we are sort of at the peak, and time will tell. So concern for sure. And then what about the safety issues? So what's in a aerosol that comes from a nicotine e-cigarette? Obviously there's nicotine. There are also flavors. Flavors are the way that the industry actually hooked teens on thinking that all that they were taking in was just this water vapor and flavors. It's interesting too because the flavors can be very toxic to the lungs. So flavors, often described as safe or approved, are approved for ingestion in food. They've never been studied or proven to be safe when they're inhaled into the lungs. And some are actually known to be very toxic. There are also volatile organic compounds that are in the aerosol that comes from e-cigarettes. There are fine particles that can go very deep in the lungs and create toxicity and some known conditions. And then we have heavy metals, because those come from the devices themselves, things like tin, like lead, like nickel, that certainly aren't meant to be inhaled into the lungs. And then there's quite a long list of known carcinogens that also exist in the aerosol. So the aerosols for the individual vaping, but also for those of us around an individual vaping, have a number of toxic components. And then let's just finish by, let me give you a little bit of information about concerns when it comes to safety for vaping with youth. And I'm hoping most of you here have already learned about this, but just in case. First, and we're not really here to talk about adult use, but I want to make clear that there really is not sufficient evidence to say that these devices work as a smoking cessation tool for adults. And that's the reason a lot of the industry promotes these products. So there's not sufficient evidence for that, but we do have evidence that when teens are using e-cigarettes, it's actually an on-ramp for smoking. So teens who start vaping with e-cigarettes and nicotine, they are much more likely to become cigarette smokers, typically within about 2 years of starting vaping. We know that the teen brain is uniquely sensitive to nicotine, and nicotine actually can facilitate addiction to other substances that teens use. Vaping, when we look at COVID, there was a nice piece of work that came out of Stanford where early in the pandemic we learned that teens who were vaping were 5 times more likely to test positive for COVID. So there's certainly a risk for acquiring COVID-19 infection. And then when it comes to vaping and marijuana, there's a strong association, and teens who are vaping nicotine have about a 3 to 4-fold chance of more likely becoming users of marijuana. And then finally, it was in the news a lot until COVID came along, but there's a lung disease that we call EVALI, or a vaping lung disease, which not only leads to very serious injury in the lungs, in particular young people who do a lot of vaping, but can even lead to death. And of course, we had what sounded like 2 years ago. We sat here and we were talking about numbers, and it sounded like so much, and I think any of those numbers just pale in the pandemic now. But no doubt that there is absolutely nothing that's safe about e-cigarettes or vaping.
It's terrifying, Dr. Sirota. Thank you.
I'm not trying to scare that. This is real. This is science.
The science is important. And this is good. It leads to a question for Dr. Cortesi. So, in addition to vaping, what are signs to look for if my child is using drugs or alcohol? And you'd mentioned some of the resources that Stevenson has, but could you share a little bit more about that so parents can prevent or intervene in their child's use?
So to capitalize on something you said, specifically I would encourage parents to focus on preventing before we start looking at looking for those signs of use. If we can prevent it up front, that's absolutely the goal. I don't think anyone on this panel or anyone in this room would want someone to have a child struggling with a substance use disorder at any point. If we can prevent it, that's the direction we want to start from. But if you start to notice things or you start to feel like something might be off for your child, I would say trust your gut for starters. You know your child best, and even in these teen years when they seem like creatures from another planet sometimes in the way that they're thinking, you really do know who they are at their core. So watching for any changes in habits and behavior. And again, I know that's difficult because part of being a teenager is changing a lot of the habits, growing and developing and figuring out who you are. But when we see significant changes in social group, eating habits, sleeping habits, what they smell like, in the amount of contact that they have with you, I think those are definite signs to pay attention to. I always encourage parents, if you've set a curfew for your student, you should probably be awake at the time that they're coming in the house, and it would be a great opportunity to give them a hug for the night. Just to get an idea, to take an opportunity, one, to show them that you care about them by staying up and by showing affection. Two, teens are more likely to want to have a conversation with you at that point. They're not going to want to talk about it the next morning when they're rushing to get things ready for whatever they're doing. It's in that moment where you probably have the greatest opportunity for a conversation about what happened that evening. And if they're hesitant to have that conversation with you and want to rush off to their room without seeing you, maybe that's something to take notice of with your child as well. I think having this bedroom is a great opportunity for parents just to see things that you might not have noticed. So looking for paraphernalia can be hard nowadays. The devices that Dr. Sirota is talking about often resemble pens. They can look like flash drives or jump drives that were common for USBs. So it can sometimes be difficult to spot some of these items. I would say if you find an item that you're not sure what it is, ask, Google it, look it up, ask a friend to help you identify what that is. While it is definitely not a norm for students to use, we do, again, another misconception that kids have is they'll say everybody does. I was talking to a student the other day that said, well, everybody. I said, oh, so everybody you know does it? You don't know like a single person. And they're like, oh no, well yeah, I know people who don't. Oh, so everybody does it. Once they're challenged, then they're like, oh yeah, maybe everybody doesn't. But really the vast majority of students at Stevenson do not use regularly. And a huge chunk have never tried. So I think even when you look at Catalyst, the Catalyst at the high school is 125 kids, not only who have chosen never to use, but are willing to say that publicly. So I think there is a norm here for non-use as well. I would say take it seriously. I think parents often also want to say, well, maybe I did that when I was a kid, and I would say that the substances that exist today are not the substances that you used or that people used when we were younger. Marijuana is a completely different drug. Vaping is not the equivalent of cigarettes or the same as cigarettes. And so it's a completely different world. So I encourage you guys to really educate yourself on the substances. In terms of the resources, I did mention the SST team. But if it's substance specific, I'm that resource for you here at Stevenson. Myself, there is another drug counselor in the building. I also have an intern. So we are here to serve as a resource for you. Again, it is completely confidential. You don't even have to give us your name if you don't want to. And we're happy to either meet with you or speak to you just to process through the situation on any question you might have related to this topic.
Thank you. And I highly recommend talking to Dr. Cortesi because she's brilliant, as you can see. Next question, Principal Gobble. So you had mentioned that attendance is up to the freshman mixer and different things, which is so exciting to hear. We know that socialization among teens is vital to their development. How is Stevenson encouraging teens to stay safely connected this school year?
So for just sort of a quick walk down memory lane, about 10 years ago, one of my first years here, we redid the library. And up until that point, the library was a place that opened at about 7:30, closed at 3:30, and kids sort of went in there if they had to. And when we rebuilt it, we tried to make it look as much like a Barnes & Noble as we could, a place that was comfortable to be, and immediately was full of kids. And we realized our biggest mistake was we didn't make it big enough, because the kids want to be there. And that lesson for us was what we realized at that moment, that Stevenson is really the heart of this community. There's not a mall or a downtown or a place where people go, and kids, they're safe here and they're happy here. And so we immediately kept that ILC space open until 6:30 at night. So now kids could stay later, hang out with their friends. There's still a bus ride home. And for us, everything we've done since then is a continuation of how do we build this as a space, the safe space for your son or daughter to be pretty much all the time. One of the things that we're working on right now, if you've noticed the construction at the other end of the building, we are finishing up a fitness center next to the new field house. That fitness center is going to be open on the weekends, before and after school, and all students with an ID will be able to come and use it for free. So it will be a place where you can come and work out, take care of yourself, and be in a safe place. So mom and dad know you're safe. So, that's what we believe ourselves to be, the place you can come. So to that, how do you socialize, right? All of you, like as Dr. Cortesi was saying, everybody knows kids all around the building. They might be on the badminton team. Go to a badminton match. Scream your head off. Act like a fool. Yell for your friend. Like, how fun would that be? Bring 3 or 4 of your friends. Like, you don't have to just go to the football game or the basketball game. Come to the cross country meet. We were at that. I was just there about an hour ago. Yell at kids as they run by. Woo, go, go, go. Like, and bring your friends. Bring 2 or 3 friends. That opportunity to socialize and be at a place is I think the best thing we can offer as a school. And come to a play, come to the concert, come watch your friends who have such amazing talents perform and do what they do. That's what we want to be for the community.
Excellent. I was at the Wellness Street Fest and the DJ club was performing and everyone was out cheering them on, and I know it's beautiful. Next question for Officer Lill. What tips can you give parents for navigating teen social events, speaking of some other socialization, like homecoming and prom?
Well, obviously, homecoming and prom are milestone events for our students, and they're mostly positive for every student that attends them. There are obviously some negative stereotypes associated to those events, and unfortunately, as law enforcement, those are the things that we see when things go wrong with students who engage in behaviors they shouldn't be doing. We as the police have to respond to those and deal with it. And so, I came up with some list of things that are real important to avoid police interaction with students on those nights. And one, we expect parents to communicate with their student and have expectations set about what they should and shouldn't be doing. Encourage them to attend school-sponsored events that are safe, know who they're with and where they're going. Discuss the negative stereotypes and identify them, their dangers, risks, and consequences before they go out with their friends. Give your child options on ways to get out of uncomfortable situations via Uber, calls to relatives, or calls to you. Set a curfew. Talk with or meet the parents who are going to be present at post-prom or post-homecoming parties to ensure safe supervision is present. Let those parents know what your expectations are if your child's going to be there. And be aware of social hosting laws in Lincolnshire and other communities that prohibit parents from hosting parties and things like that. And there's some pretty serious consequences related to those for the adults, whether they're aware of it or not in some cases. And have a check-in schedule over the night. You can't check in with your student more than enough and over-communicate with them to make sure things are going well and they're going to avoid those negative stereotypes and have a positive experience. Remember though, most importantly, you're the parent, you're not their friend, and your goal is to make sure that they come home safe at the end of the night.
Can I just add too, that Sandstorm does have a kit on the website for parents to peruse that just gives you some additional tips and information about if you choose to host an after party or an event for students following a school function, just ways that you can keep yourself safe and educate yourself on what those laws are. So I encourage you to check that resource out on the Stand Strong website because it is an amazingly comprehensive resource.
Thank you. Well, in the post-event email, we'll list that in there too. Thank you, Officer Lill, as well. Maya, from a student perspective, how can parents help their teens practice saying no to drugs and alcohol if they're offered them at social events?
This is my favorite question ever. Oh, sorry, I'm yelling at you. I think this is when I get to tell you that high school movies aren't real, like real things. Because I think that there's a huge misconception that like peer pressure is everywhere all the time and it's very intense. That's not really true, especially at Stevenson events. Like I've been to quite a few like social Stevenson events, which is hard to believe because I'm like in band. I'm like a nerd. I know, it's crazy. But I think that there's also something to be said for other students' respect for people's decisions surrounding using substances. We find that especially when you're friends with the person, if someone comes up to you and offers you a substance and then you say no, there are very few situations where someone's gonna be like, that's not cool. Like that's not something that like actually happens. I'm sure it happens somewhere, like 0.2% out of 10,000 students, fine. But I also think that something that is important to remember is that the reason that a student, I think, more likely would choose to use substances in a social event is because they feel an internal obligation to conform to, someone is violently shaking their head. Oh, nodding. Okay, we're agreeing. I got stared for a second. They feel this internal obligation to conform to what they believe everyone else is doing. And I think that that's a very powerful distinction to make because that means that the decision to use substances is coming entirely from the student, which means a couple things. One, you have the most control because you can change the behavior before the situation ever occurs. You can shape the mindset surrounding substances before they are ever introduced to a social situation where they have to make that decision. Which means if you kind of ingrain it into their head, and not in a way where you're telling them, you don't use substances, I promise that's not going to be effective. If you kind of guide them through thinking about, like what we mentioned earlier, thinking about their reasons not to use substances, this is my perfect time to plug What's Your Why. Have them think about their reasons not to use substances. Their peers don't use substances. Why? Everyone has a reason either for choosing to use or choosing not to use. What are their reasons why they shouldn't choose to use substances? And then, if they come into a social situation with a concrete decision made around substances, they are in this mindset where they're like, I don't want to lose because of X, Y, or Z, because I'm an athlete, and because I don't want that to impact my performance, or because I have a test tomorrow, and that's not going to be good for my grades, or because because my parent is going to come home and they're going to know, and because I don't want to disappoint them, and I know it's their expectation that I don't use substances. So for all of those reasons, I choose not to use substances. You have the ability to create that mindset, create the decision before they're ever ingrained into the social situation. So I would encourage you to just kind of have that conversation in a casual way. You don't have to like sit down on the couch and be like, hey, want to talk about substances? That's not going to work. But if you ask them like, hey, I saw on the news like something about substances, make something up, everything's on the news. Just about like, what is your opinion about this thing that like happens in real life? What do you think about substance use? Like I mentioned earlier, conversations are really powerful things, and you're more likely to get the results that you want. They're more likely to have an open mind. Like don't lecture. That's I guess my takeaway.
Thanks, Maya. So looping back to mental health, Dr. Sirota, how can I help monitor my teens' mental health and wellness throughout this school year?
So we've said this many times, and it's just in some respects the reality of the situation that we're in this pandemic, but mental health concerns during the pandemic have become epidemic. However, we're also very hopeful as pediatricians, as parents, as professionals who work in school, educators, that returning to school for kids of all ages, but especially teens, is really going to have a positive impact. And this is just anecdotal, but I see a lot of kids every day in my own office, and I absolutely see a difference. I mean, it was starting last year when I could see those few kids who did get to go to school and were in person and learning. But now when I get to see kids for their checkup every day, how's it going? Of course, their masks are on, but I can still tell they're smiling, and they weren't last year when they were home. So I'm very hopeful that this return to learning that we wanted so badly for students is really going to have a positive impact. But that being said, it is a really important time to be monitoring our own kids and our teens. And the reason we care so much about it, especially those of us in Stand Strong and the work we do in prevention, is because we know that self-medication for mental health concerns can really be a path towards a substance use disorder. So it's good to monitor. I want to, give you some tips as parents, but I like to start this conversation with something that I think is really important, and that is I tell parents in my own practice, don't buy in to some of the myths of teens. And what I mean by that is that most teens really aren't moody, contrarian, risk takers who care nothing about what their parents have to say. And we've heard this theme tonight, but we should see teenagers or adolescents for who they really are. We know that parents are the most important influence or guardians of teens. Those are the most important influences in their life, more so than peers. Teens do care a lot about their parents' opinions, their parents' well-being and not disappointing their parents or guardians. Teens do worry about their own personal safety, and they want guidance from adults. They don't want to figure out how to be safe on their own. They want boundaries. And actually, when parents create boundaries that exist, but maybe they're a little wider than when those teens were younger, so there is an opportunity to explore, or an opportunity, as Maya said, to sort of figure out that they got there themselves. If we create those boundaries, teens stay within those boundaries. So wherever we set that boundary, a teen might go all the way there. They're not going to extend beyond in most cases if we set the boundaries. So I think that's number one. And then number two, when we're talking about monitoring our teens' health or your own adolescents' health and mental health, I like to make the point that mental health is health. It's all health. And I think parents know from the moment their child's born or a child comes into their home how to monitor for symptoms or signs of illness. And so I really want people to think about mental health in the same way. If you have concerns about how your teen seems, it's a health issue. You should be contacting whoever that individual is who you go to for health concerns. If it's an emergency concern, you should respond to that same health concern in the way you would any other concern that looks like an emergency. So whether it's an asthmatic who's struggling and their inhalers aren't helping them to breathe easy and you're headed to the emergency room, so might be some other mental health crisis. So I think, and this has already been said, so I'm going to be brief, but probably the best way to connect with your teen and figure out what's going on is to make time that's on their schedule, not your schedule. So find that time, even if you are exhausted because it's the end of the night. I know our oldest always came into our room just as we were falling asleep, but that's when she wanted to share things, and so we learned to stay up and figure out what was going on. But make time to talk. It's going to be lots of little conversations. You're never going to get all the information you want in one conversation, but that's okay. Just lots of short conversations, and have the expectation that you can piece all that together, stay on top of what's going on, and then have sort of that thread that goes between all those conversations and especially now we need to do that, is just have this overarching goal of helping your teen develop their own coping strategies. Because at the end of the day, using substances is really just a very ineffective and unhealthy coping strategy, right? That's how it starts. So if you have that goal that you're going to help build coping strategies, you're going to understand what's going on, so maybe you give some good tips for strategies that your teen can use, be very effective as a parent. I think the part about what can you watch for specifically, it entirely overlaps what Dr. Cortesi was saying about, because substance use is a mental health concern. So there's a lot of overlap. It's just that trust your instincts, you know your child best, you really do as parents. You are the experts in your kids, and if something seems like it's not right, something seems like it's off, it probably is. I can't think of a single time in practice where a parent came to me and said, you know, I'm really worried that he might have blank, or I'm really worried that she might be fill in the blank. I cannot think of a single time where what the parent was worried about did not end up being the diagnosis, particularly when it came to a mental health concern. So I think, you know, get to know your kids, get to know what's going on, trust your instincts, and then remember, it's their health. So you should approach your primary care physician or whoever is the care provider for your child in the same way you would any other health issue. That's what we expect. We're trained to do that. And having a mental health concern or having a substance use issue going on, it is not a reflection on your teen's character. It's not a poor reflection on who they are as a person or who you are or how you parented. It's a health issue. There is treatment, and really as healthcare providers, we're here to help with that just as we would any other health issue.
Thank you for that great reminder, Dr. Sirota. The next is for Dr. Cortesi. One parent said, to be quite honest, I've increased my own drinking since the pandemic began. It's not the healthiest coping mechanism, and I feel like my teen sees alcohol as harmless because of my behavior. How can I help coach him?
So I think, you know, from studies that did occur during the pandemic, we did see that adult use did increase. I think everyone was having a difficult time coping with the pandemic at various points. However, your child will look to you to be the role model. And while Stance Strong doesn't have a stance on adult use specifically, we're not prohibitionists in any way necessarily. We do take a stance on the aspects of adult use that impact youth use. And so I think it is really important to note that they are watching you all the time. I think it's a mind shift to have your youth see that you can have fun without drinking, that you can cope, or that you have strategies other than substance use. That when you walk in the door after a tough day, or you've gotten off your 15th Zoom call for that afternoon, that you're not saying, oh, I'm exhausted, I need a drink. Because you are teaching them something in everything that you do. If instead you were exhausted and you said, gosh, I would love to sit and watch a movie with you. Like, do you want to pick the show or the movie? Like, we could do that together. Or I'd love to talk with you. Or let's go for a walk. Does anyone want to come with me? Those are better strategies. And while you as an adult might know what your limits are in terms of substance use, your student doesn't have that same luxury. And their brain is not in the same place as yours is. And kind of going back to what I said a little bit earlier about, you know, what you did when you were younger or what you do now, I think it's really important to note that the teen brain is not developed. And I'm sure you've heard that over many years. I know Dr. Sirota talks about it frequently with parents as well. But what you do after the age of 21 or 25 in terms of substance use will impact your brain in a much different way than it will impact the brain of your teen, because their brain is not fully developed. So your choice to utilize a substance at the end of a hard day will not change your brain necessarily in the same way that it will prime their brain for addictive behaviors. So it is really key. Their brains right now are they're pruning. They're picking off the parts that are developing neural pathways that they're going to continue on for life. They're developing their habits for life, their go-to, the thing that their brain is going to default to. If that is going for a walk, or talking to a friend, or watching a movie with a loved one, that is a much better strategy for them than drinking. Because as they get older, that is going to be their go-to. So we strongly encourage you to model the behaviors that you want to see in your children. I know it's hard, but it's hard for them too. And if they can see you find success in it, what better example might they have in their life. If you can teach them how you want them to do it, or other people will teach them for you. So I encourage you to take the opportunity to teach them what it is that you want for them in their success in life.
Thank you. Shifting to a little bit of a different topic, Officer Lill, what tips do you have for parents who are parenting in this digital age? What apps should they be aware of? And are there effective ways to address cyberbullying? One parent asks.
It's a great question. The technology that we use to educate our kids is a double-edged sword, because it's also the same technology that's used by predators and by other students to brutally harass kids via cyberbullying. And it's a real problem. Unfortunately, I had to become an expert in social media, and I don't necessarily care for social media, but it's the medium by which students communicate throughout their school day with one another. And obviously through the pandemic, it was a way, in a healthy way, for students to stay in touch with one another. So there's a real dilemma there with it. And parents aren't always familiar with those applications. I'm in the Facebook generation, but students nowadays aren't using Facebook. They're using Snapchat, they're using Instagram. And these mediums are very, very not friendly to the teenage brain and the way the teenage brain thinks, and impulsivity with posting and saying things, and it doesn't always work out well, and it is certainly a problem. There's dozens of platforms out there that are risks to our students and your kids. The ones that I am most familiar with, unfortunately, are Instagram and Snapchat. The nature of Snapchat appears to be harmless. It's kind of animated. But the reality is that students can send things to one another and they auto-delete, so you as a parent have no way to know what was sent. And it's an easy way for kids to hide things from their parents. So that would be my biggest one. But there's dozens of them. You can Google apps I should be concerned about for my teen, and it'll list them. It'll tell you why they're a risk to your teen. Those could be Tinder, they could be dating sites, they can be bulletin boards. There's various things, and we're not even getting into the dark web and access to that as well, which is even more concerning. In one case here at school, without going into details, a student posted something that was insensitive and inflammatory in their Snapchat group, and it led to a barrage of harassment and cyberbullying back because of what that student posted. And it was very much an emotional time for that student, and very difficult for them to navigate socially. And that certainly interfered with education and every aspect of that student's life. And I was working with their dean every day to try to come up with ways to refocus and to move past it. But students can be brutal towards each other if you say something that's not appropriate, and they're not always forgiving immediately. And that makes it even more difficult for that student. So that you've got that emotional pressure, that social pressure. And ultimately, I believe what we did in that case was that student had to completely terminate all social media. And they still are, and it's been quite a long time. And that can be difficult for students as well. So as a parent, you just need to be aware of what applications your student or child's using. Monitor them. There's software out there that allows you to monitor them either knowingly or unknowingly. You can install it on their phone and see what they're doing, where they're going, who they're talking to. Speak with your students about the permanent nature of online posts and photographs, and how things are truly never gone once they're disseminated in a chat group. And you can't take back what you say or do on the internet. And this is very much known. It's a very common thing nowadays. The immediate ability to communicate is what, again, is that problem where I can just say what I think without thinking about it, and I'm being judged by dozens and dozens of students in a chat group. So again, use monitoring software if you think it's appropriate. Talk to your student about the permanent nature of things, and just be aware of it.
Thank you, Officer Lill. So as a reminder, if you have any questions, our students will give you note cards, and you're welcome to write those down. And we have a couple minutes to get to some of them. We did have one come in so far. Can Dr. Sirota speak to the use of jewels specifically? Are they safer alternatives to tobacco cigarettes, especially for heavy smokers? And what are the organs at risk?
Yeah, there are a lot of questions there. Okay, I'm gonna try. So, from a healthcare perspective, a Juul would not be considered safer. It's different than combustible tobacco, but it is a device that allows one to inhale a significant amount of nicotine. And as I was saying earlier, there is not evidence to suggest that an electronic device like Juul is going to promote adult smoking cessation. So there really is not a health recommendation from that, at least not from the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force. We also know that most adults who use the devices, because it sounds like this question is a little bit adult related, most adults use them in addition to smoking combustible cigarettes, but they tend not to give up smoking. So we don't see it as a substitute, and as I said, it's really disappointing that the FDA wasn't able to draw that conclusion this past week. The other part of the question,
What organs are at risk?
what organs? Many organs are at risk, but when we think about what smoking or vaping does, the organs most at risk in particular are the lungs and the heart and blood vessels. So the diseases that we see with regular cigarettes are the same diseases that we anticipate and have potential to see with vaping. So those are things like heart attacks, things like chronic lung disease, and in particular stroke related to the vascular changes. And I will also add that although that's not the question, we are starting to see the same health risks and the same organs damage through cannabis use, so vaping and smoking of cannabis. In fact, young adult males are at significantly greater risk of heart attacks, what we call myocardial infarction, within hours of using marijuana. So just to again make clear, cannabis is not harmless, despite what many of our local dispensaries might want us to believe.
Thank you, Dr. Sirota. This is a great question. How do I bring up the conversation about substance use to my student without making it seem forced? And this is open to anyone.
I'd love to hear Maya's answer. Maya always has a good answer.
All right, so my go-to with this is really to, first of all, don't seem disingenuous. Like, if you come up with, if you approach the topic of substance use in a way that makes it seem like you feel obligated to talk about it simply because you're doing your parental duty, I don't think that's going to do you any favors. I think if you try to act genuinely interested in their answer, I think that's going to do you a lot of favors. Because I don't know about you guys, but I love when people ask me like what I think about things. That's like a big compliment to me. Because, you know, then you're kind of acknowledging the perspective of a teenager as an equal to your own, and that's not necessarily something that happens a lot as a teenager, in my opinion, I think happens enough, especially relating to substance use. I find a lot of times we're told kind of what we believe instead of being asked. People are laughing, it's true. So I think relating it to something in your life, this is always a really good thing. Even if it's not necessarily something that happened that day, but being like, hey, somebody struck up this conversation with me, or like asked me this question, and I immediately thought of you, and I was like, I wonder what your perspective on that would be. And if you connect that to substances in any way, you have an immediate into a conversation. And then it just becomes, what do you think about that topic? Oh, well, here's what I think. And even if you have disagreements, I use that word too liberally, I think, not necessarily an argument, but if your opinions differ in any sort of way, then you have the opportunity to research things together and come up with some sort of cohesive agreement. And not only is that quality time, but it's also an opportunity for you to be able to shape their perspective on substances.
You have much wisdom, Maya. That's great. Jack, would you mind collecting any cards? If anyone has them, feel free to give them his way. This might be just a quick one. When is an appropriate time to begin talking to my student about substances? Like an age range? Maybe one of the doctors.
Well, I can chime in on that. I think any of us could. I'm going to say about 4th grade. I think
we really have to start early, and I think it comes from a place of teaching resiliency, teaching about coping. By that age, kids are certainly aware of what's going on around them and whether they're recognizing adults have sober fun or not have sober fun. But I think what we're learning is we have to start earlier. Middle school is a great time, but it may not be early enough for everyone.
Yeah, I would err even earlier. I think it just, you modify the way that you have the conversation with a younger child. My children are not high school age yet, but I think even from the time that they were 3, if my daughter had a temperature, I would say, well, do you want Tylenol? And she would say, well, I don't know, is it gonna make me feel better? I said, yes. Do you need Tylenol? And she would say, no, I feel okay. Okay. What do you want to do? And she would say, well, no, thank you, I don't need it. So just teaching them, like, what the difference between a want and a need is, at that age. Again, the modeling that comes from that, or if they see somebody out doing something, or something happens to be on the television as they're passing by, just say, what do you think about that? Why do you think they acted that way? Did that look fun to you? What did you think about that? And just ask their opinion on that topic, just to get them formulating their own opinions as early as possible, and having open dialogue. I was saying to someone, my family and I were in Galena this past weekend, and my children saw people who may have had a little too much at one point, and they were both like, what is wrong with that? But it brought up great conversation, and I have an 8 and a 9-year-old. So I think that there's opportunity to have those conversations early. It just wouldn't be like the drug talk. But to start shaping their thoughts and opinions about that, and also teaching them to delay gratification and why that's important. So conversations like that can be had much younger, that are more thematic, that relate to substance use but aren't substance specific. But teaching them, like, can I put off needing something done? Can I put something on a wish list instead of needing to purchase it right now? All of those things help students long term in terms of their mental health, being able to say, no, I don't need relief in this moment, that I can sit with it. I can sit with it for a little bit, and it might not feel great, but I'm strong enough to get through it. Obviously, in terms of medication, when medication is necessary, medication is necessary. But just sparking those conversations as early as possible, I think, is beneficial.
That's great. This is also for anyone. Have you seen an increase in the use of recreational marijuana in Stevenson students since it was legalized in Illinois? Any data on that come out yet?
Again, it's been really hard to tell. Right after it was legalized, the pandemic came into place and we were e-schooling. So
Sure.
again, we're, if I'm being fair, anticipating perhaps a rise, but we have yet to really see those numbers and evaluate them. I think at the end of the school year, we'll have a better viewpoint and idea of what's happening.
Thank you.
One thing I might add, because I hear this in the office, as we talk confidentially to our teen patients, as we understand what they're doing and what risks they may or may not be exposed to. And I often hear teens who are using marijuana say, but it comes from a dispensary. In fact, just hours ago today, since I only use from a dispensary. And so I think that's an important message we can give as parents, is what's coming from the dispensaries is not harmless and it's not safe. We're looking at THC concentrations that are very high, on the order of the high teens, 20% to 60% or higher. And so I think that's something that we really have to dispel. So, if it's labeled and it's been diverted from one of our local dispensaries, that maybe that's something that's better for them than purchasing the drug in some other illegal way. And that is just, unfortunately, it's not true. So,
I don't know if I can speak on numbers for specific use statistics, but I can talk about normalization and perception of risk. I think this last year, it's only been legal for recreational use since January of 2020, and then a pandemic happened. So I don't think this has necessarily been a normal year, but especially I think because the pandemic happened and then social media became
the avenue of social interaction, especially during quarantine. The amount of normalization that we're seeing and decreased perception of risk, I think, among high school students in general, I would consider alarming because it's not something that I think I've ever seen grow so quickly in relation to a substance, because I have never been alive when a substance has been like suddenly legalized where I live. So I think that what I would say is, even if right now we can't tell if the usage statistics are increasing, the fact that the normalization is such a perpetuated issue is in itself something that we need to start combating before we have the opportunity to see like, oh, well, now we're having a problem with cannabis use.
And historically, substances that are normalized and where the perception of risk decreases, we see an increase in the use of that substance, which is why that is so important. We will be taking the Student Health and Wellness Survey again this year. It occurs every 2 years. So, well, in 2022. So in February, your students will be taking that, and parents will also receive a survey at that time to gauge your perception on a number of topics. And as Officer Lill said, we'll have better data at that time as to what has happened in the last couple of years.
That might answer this question. A parent was wondering about if Stevenson reports drug or alcohol incidences like a police blotter, but maybe that survey would be a better representation.
Sure. So, juvenile offenses are confidential, as Officer Lill can speak to probably better than I. We at Stevenson, when there is a substance offense on campus, we do our best to provide a therapeutic intervention option. While we have to provide a consequence because it was a violation of rule, it is really important for us to do something to help that student make different decisions moving forward and to support them and their family in that process. So again, while a consequence is applied, it's not our focus. Our focus is on making sure that different decisions are made moving forward. With that, we also don't want a student who's made a poor choice related to substances to have that follow them for the rest of their life. That's not what we're looking for. We want a space where kids can make mistakes and grow from them. And so to that end, the police are involved if and when needed, but all of those matters are confidential. I don't know if you want to add something else or Will.
Well, from the police perspective, I subscribe wholeheartedly to what you said. The juvenile justice system is designed to rehabilitate, reform, redirect, and be punitive when necessary, but only when absolutely necessary. So any arrests or reports involving juveniles are always confidential and will automatically be expunged under Illinois law when they turn 18. Other aspects need to take place via paperwork through the courts. But yeah, any involvement we have with students is always confidential.
Thank you.
I do think the answer, maybe the back to the original question, the survey that we give the kids is a much better indicator of the usage rates in the students, because quite honestly, most of the students are not using on campus. And so, like, getting in trouble here is not where those things are happening. So the number of times they get in trouble on campus, that number would be very small.
Very small. Yeah.
That does not mean the kids are not making other choices outside on the weekends, and those are, we know the kids tell the truth in those surveys for the most part, and so that's the information that really, I think whoever asked that question is looking for.
That's a great distinction. And then, do we think the teenage drug problem, I don't know if this is locally, regionally, or nationwide, is getting better or worse, and how do we measure that? Kind of a broad question.
So, I think you and I can both talk about this a bit. So, I think it varies from area to area, and substance use trends always come in waves. While we often see substance use, lately we have seen some decline in youth substance use in some substances. Again, we sort of anticipate a rise in marijuana use, just given the changes legally. I would say that our local data is probably, our numbers are usually lower than surrounding communities and state and national numbers. But we fall pretty much in line with some slightly lower numbers in our own trends. As to whether it's improving, I think, again, that varies, and I think sometimes it's hard to look at data and know what was included in data at a given time. Again, I think the pandemic is sort of making those numbers difficult to determine at this point.
Yeah, and I think looking at national trends, as we know, binge drinking has been decreasing for a long time, and we have seen that in our community. Prescription drug use was decreasing fairly significantly. It took a little turn up in the past year. There is also a sense that alcohol use has taken a bit of an upturn, just kind of paralleling what we're seeing with adults in the pandemic. Marijuana use actually tends to be holding steady, but we always say it's holding steady at this high level at a time where virtually all other substance use has been decreasing fairly significantly. So those are sort of the broad trends. Teens are about, just to kind of put things in perspective, currently teens are about 3 times more likely to use marijuana as compared to smoking cigarettes, if you look at like high schoolers or teens currently.
Thank you. All right, one last question for each of you, just briefly. If there is just one thing you want parents to know to keep their child safe as a takeaway from tonight, what would it be? And let's start on the other side with you, Officer Lill.
All right, in context to homecoming and prom and internet safety and cyberbullying, you know, I kind of fall back in an old thing that we say in law enforcement, and that's trust but verify. Your students and your kids are going to tell you something, and you're inclined to believe them because you want to, but you should also verify too. That verification is a process that will work to keep them safe, and if they're up to something, hopefully you'll be able to detect it and deter anything bad from happening.
Maya?
Okay, so I think I've said it many times, the word conversations, but I really want to harp on the importance of conversations and the power that they have in prevention specifically, because like we mentioned earlier, we never want it to get to the point where we're having to intervene. So start preventing early so that you don't have to ever get to a point where you're forced to deal with the consequence of something that you could have prevented earlier. Not that that's always the case, but if there's even a chance that we can prevent something that could become a bigger issue, that could have serious impacts in the future, we want to always avoid that. And conversations, I think, are a great way to start with that.
Principal Gobble?
You're good. So I think the one thing that I would say, often parents, when they start to notice something is off or they have concerns with their son or daughter, they'll kind of keep that information closed in tight and they're not quite sure what to do. But I can tell you that, for many kids that are involved in activities, the kids are here on campus with our professionals from 7 to 7 at night often, and most of the time they're with you, they're in bed. So I would definitely say if you're worried about anything, concerned, just having questions about your son or daughter's behavior, call our counselors, call the teachers, reach out to the professionals here and let us help you, and we can provide assistance and support and even observations that can help make a better decision moving forward. So just use us.
You just made it really easy for me because I have the same message. You're the experts in your kids. I think it's so important to seek help early. If you have an inkling that something that might be going on, check it out early. Don't wait. Let your children have the advantage of an easier fix if there's a problem, just like we would recommend for any other health issue. And it takes this whole village, so we all represent a different perspective, but we're all here to help. And just know that whoever is the primary health care provider for your adolescent that individual, I think I speak for all of my colleagues, that individual is very interested in the whole health of your child, including their mental health, and it's a very appropriate place to turn when you have a concern.
Dr. Cortesi?
So I think you have to remember, even though sometimes your student doesn't want you to remember, that you have a lot of power in their life. And that the message that you send to them is crucial. It's important for you not to say, to give vague messages. So it's important not to say, have fun, don't get in trouble, don't do anything I wouldn't do. It's really important that you give a clear, non-use message with that in a loving way. So, you know, it's important to talk about maybe pre-homecoming, pre-prom, or pre-Friday nights, just to remind them that they're the most important thing in your life, that you love them more than anything in the world, and that's why you continue to have these conversations with them, and that it's really important to you that they choose not to use because of the level of importance that they hold in your life. Kids want to feel important, and they need to feel important to you. So I encourage you to just share a very clear message from a place of love.
Thank you. So this concludes our panel. Can we give it up for our amazing panelists? Thank you so much. They brought such a unique perspective, and hope you maybe took some notes as well. As we conclude, Stand Strong Coalition is volunteer driven, and so we would love to invite you to serve with us. We have parents who serve on our committee, so if you're interested in that, we'll be emailing out some information. Encourage your students, if they're not already involved in Catalyst. Catalyst would love to have them. As you know, it's over 100, nearing 200 students that serve on 13 committees, and they do so much, and so I know they would love to have you. On your way in, you should have received a survey. We would love if you could fill that out. Your feedback is really vitally important, and there's a QR code that you can take a picture of if you want to do the survey on your phone, instead of filling it out paper-wise. You can do that. Also, the mock team bedroom will be open for walkthrough, so please stop by before you head out. And I think our panelists will be around for a couple minutes if you have individual questions for them. To those who joined us online, thank you. We're so glad that you tuned in, and we wish you and your families a healthy and safe fall season. Thank you all.